I'm John Gerlach, and we're so glad you're part of this Q&A for mental health. We've been in a message series talking about just some things we don't normally talk about, and we've mainly focused in on mental health. And what we've done is we've taken your questions, so I have a list of questions here that you guys have turned in, and we're glad to have with us Karl Brewer. Karl, glad you're here. We're going to ask Karl a couple questions. Karl, let's just start off by telling us a little bit about your background, a little bit about your expertise in this area.
Sure. I'm trained as a family therapist. I was a professional counselor for 30 years, retired in 2018. Spent a lot of time both in private practice as well as working with psychiatric hospitals. Have been in this area since 1995.
Okay. All right. Well, Karl, let's just dive in with the first question. Here it is. Tell us about the genetic component to depression. How much of a factor is that? What percentage is that? Kind of unpack that one for us.
There have been a lot of different studies throughout the years trying to find if there is a genetic component to depression. They've done both twin studies as well as identical twin as well as fraternal twin studies. What they have found, especially with identical twins, is that if one twin has depression, there's a 50% chance, 40 to 50% chance that the other twin will develop depression. They have been unable to define that there is a definitive depression gene, a defective gene that identifies depression. They have found depression in families, but not where if mom and dad have it, it means that the child will have it. It may be a history of it, but you don't inherit it from mom and dad. They found the defective genes for like cystic fibrosis and for like certain forms of muscular dystrophy and Huntington's disease, but they haven't found that particular link yet for depression itself.
Okay, so bottom line on that, there is some correlation, but it's not definitely genetic. They haven't found a gene. There's not. No. Okay. All right. Great. All right. Second question. This is one of the questions that was turned into us. Talk about medication and from a faith background and from a faith perspective. When someone is being told, "Hey, you should just have faith," and how does that play into dealing with medication, having medication? Somebody says, well, you shouldn't take that because you should have faith. So how would you unpack that for somebody?
I think the first thing you have to do is understand the role of what medication is. One of the functions of medication is it is an external control when there are no internal controls present.
Okay.
Particularly, for example, in anxiety. During an anxiety attack, the brain produces a lot of chemicals, imbalanced chemicals that trigger fear and anxiety and so forth. Okay. There is a chemical in the brain called GABA that reacts to control those imbalanced chemicals. And so for example, what Ativan, it's a benzodiazepine, does is Ativan increases the amount of GABA in the brain that reduces those anxiety and those chemicals in the brain. The drug produces a control that's not there in the brain. Okay.
All right. Second part of that question, this person is saying, they're being told by someone from a faith perspective, hey, you're on medication, but you just should have faith. If you had enough faith, you shouldn't be on medication. How would you unpack that, and would you agree, disagree with that kind of statement?
I disagree with it because I think part of one of the things that God gives us are tools that we have today, and one of those tools could be medication.
Okay. All right. Our last question here is talk about, is it a goal when you talk about mental health challenges and issues, is it a goal to say, I need to be cured? When am I going to get cured of this anxiety or this depression or whatever it may be? Is that the goal when you talk about having that mental health challenge?
No, when I hear the term cured, for one thing, the first thing I think about is, oh, gee whiz, I've got an illness that needs medical attention. And that's not really what it is. It's a matter of I have an emotional issue This caused me problems I can't handle. I need to find some other way to deal with it. It's in a healthy way. The other thing I'm reminded of is when I had a mentor early on in my career, and one of us asked a question about helping cure our patients. And he looked at us and said, "Gentlemen, you cure ham and bacon. People aren't ham or bacon. Don't treat them as that." Mm-hmm. And he said, what happens is people come in and they go, "This is my world. This is how I'm handling it. It ain't working. What do I do next?" And that's how you approach it.
Okay.
You find what's going on in their world and you go, well, let's try something else. And so in looking at what's going on in their world, you find out what's going on. But you look at the resources that they have. For the believer, the very first resource we have is the Word of God. And we look at the promises that are in the Word of God, and we start there and we begin to build. You know, in Isaiah 41:10, God says that, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." And that's where you begin, you know, and even Abraham, God promised Abraham through Isaac, "I will make you the father of many nations." And Abraham believed that so much that even as he raised a knife over Isaac's heart, he believed that if he killed Isaac, God would still make him the father of many nations through Isaac. Abraham believed God's promise, and he acted on that belief. So it's learning through Scripture to act on the promises that God has given us that we find that strength to go on. And so as we look at those issues that we are confronted with, and we find someone to walk alongside of us as we go through those things in Scripture, whether that be a pastor, a friend, a Sunday school teacher, or a therapist, they walk alongside of us as we're going through those issues in life. And we bring strength from one another as bodies, as people in the body of Christ. We then begin to learn, hey, I'm not alone in this journey. And we develop those skills and those promises of God. We discover those, and we go from there.
Okay. So are you saying are you saying it's sort of like when somebody says, "I want to be cured," is it sort of like how we think of temptation, that you may have that temptation the rest of your life. You may have that same challenge the rest of your life, but it's finding those ways to walk forward through that challenge.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Great. And what other things you feel like would be helpful? Do you have any other bottom line word just about the general category of just mental health, mental emotional health in general? Kind of parting word.
Yes, I do. You know, we think in terms of only going to a therapist in times of crisis. I have a question for you. How often do you get your teeth cleaned?
That's kind of personal, Karl, but every 6 months.
Okay. How often do you get your tires changed or rotated?
On a regular basis.
How many miles?
I don't remember, but they tell me when to bring it in.
How often do you get your oil changed?
About every 5,000 miles.
How often do you get a physical?
Once a year.
How often do you get a mental health checkup?
Not on a regular basis.
Right. If we got a mental health checkup as often as we get our tires rotated, our teeth cleaned, and physical, there'd be fewer therapists. And a mental health checkup is going in and talking to someone and saying, here's what's going on in my world, here's how I'm handling it, how am I doing?
Okay. That's a good word.
And if we do that on a regular basis, we're going to find fewer life crises. But having a mental health checkup. I had a lady that I was working with when I first got out here over at Texas Tech. She had gone in, she was a lady who worked with the Department of Justice, and she was an attorney, and she went through postpartum depression. We met with her every week for 9 months. After 9 months, she said, "Karl, it's time for me to go. I need to get on with my life." She was postpartum depression. Her life with her husband had gotten really strained. She was having trouble connecting with her new infant. Work had become a real problem for her. And so after 9 months, she said, "It's time for me to go." And we talked about checking in and so forth. We started out meeting once a week. We met every other week, once every 3 weeks, and then once a month. So I didn't hear from Anna for a full year. Finally, she called me and says, Karl, something's happened. I need to come in and talk to you. Okay. She came in and says, Karl, this is what happened. This is how I dealt with it. How'd I do? She did a wonderful job with what happened. And I told her that. She went on. That was a mental health checkup.
Okay, great.
And that's what we need to do with ourselves, is have those mental health checkups. And when we do that, we're going to face fewer crises.
Okay. All right, there you have it. Karl, thank you for being with us and answering some of these questions. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Jessi, we're so glad to have you. I'm John Gerlach, who's hosting these Q&As on mental health, and we're glad to have Jessi Morgan with us. Jessi, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Jessi Morgan. I am the Program Manager of Mental Health Support at Communities and Schools of the Permian Basin. So to sum it all up, I'm a social worker.
Okay.
I used to be the director of a children's grief center here in Midland, Rays of Hope. I've spent some time in the child welfare world, so my background is really in crisis and trauma, specifically with children, but have dealt with kind of all ages.
Okay, great. Jessi, as you know, we received a lot of questions during our past series, and as we were talking about some mental and emotional health challenges, and so let me just dive into some of those questions that got turned in. The first one I want to kind of throw your way is, okay, when someone is struggling with fear, anxiety, what's some good things to say to that person? I think a lot of people say, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say to somebody that is having that kind of challenge. So what would be some things that you would offer at that point?
I mean, first of all, we are living in crazy times. I guess we're still in the midst of a pandemic, so I think that is a very normal feeling. The most important part is kind of setting the tone for the conversation, so do it in a safe spot, safe spot for them, safe spot for you, not somewhere that other people are going to be overhearing some private information. So kind of creating a safe space, and then just talking openly and honestly, validating their feelings, just letting them be heard, letting them kind of pour out what's going on, and then offering, there are a lot of great professional resources in town. So if it's kind of these persistent feelings of fear and anxiety that maybe they need some professional support, helping them get connected that way. But really just listening, reassuring, validating, because that's very normal feelings, especially now.
Jessi, what would be some of the kind of root thoughts that people are dealing with? I want to say something to someone, and so, you said validating. So validating what specifically would you say? Yeah, what kind of category?
So everyone's feelings are unique to themselves, and so it's not really our job to say to someone like, no, you don't feel that way, or that's silly that you feel that way,
Right.
because that's very much their experience. So just saying, you know what, I'm really sorry that you're feeling that way. I hear what you're saying to me. You may not understand, so don't say you understand if you don't, but if you do, you can say, hey, I understand what you're going through. This is a safe space for you to talk. Once it gets to a certain level, you may need to kind of refer out, so to speak, and say, hey, I think it's time to talk to a professional about this. But really just saying, hey, I hear you, being honest in that conversation of like, I hear you, I understand, but also if they are, a lot of times with fear and anxiety, they may be saying some untruths about themselves. They're hearing things to themselves that are untrue, and it's okay to say, hey, that's not true, You're saying that you're the worst employee ever, but I see you show up every day, and I see that you haven't missed a day of work, and I see you're excelling at your job, so I understand you feel that way, but I want to tell you that's not what I'm seeing. And so kind of validating those things as well.
Okay. And a lot of it is that they are not alone? Obviously you said support, and I think that would be really important. And I think a lot of people feel like they've got to have the right answers, but I think you said it very well, where it's not necessarily that, but it may be some of those other kind of things of just having support and just letting someone kind of talk through where they're at and what's going on and that sort of thing.
Yeah, a lot of the time, just being able to talk to someone about it is a relief in itself, A lot of people say, well, what is the best intervention? And it's like, relationship is really ultimately the best intervention. I saw y'all have the Relationship Matters shirts out there, and I love those because relationship really is the intervention. You can tell them all these things from textbooks all day long, but it's who are they going to call at 3 o'clock in the morning if they need someone? You know, it's going to be the people they have relationships with. So the people they feel safe with having those conversations. And sometimes it's as simple as just sitting down and listening and saying, hey, you know what? I hear you. I may not have went through this, but I hear you. I'm with you. I'm for you. And you can talk about it.
That's great. Jessi, let's dive into another one. What's the best way to support someone, help somebody who has addiction issues? Like, what would be kind of a plan of dealing with that?
Addiction is difficult. That is a very difficult issue. And first of all, once again, you're creating a safe space to have a conversation with them. Addiction can be very tough because sometimes you see that someone is on a path of addiction and they are not ready to kind of face that themselves. Right. They do not feel like they have a problem, so to say. We like to say if you have consequences, you're at the level of a problem. So sometimes that's little consequences, sometimes that's big ones. So really, the first thing to do is tell them, hey, I'm here for you, but also create that boundary, because you are going to have boundaries to kind of protect yourself as well, because that is, a lot of people when they start the road of addiction think, okay, let me look at the clock, it's going to be 3 months and this is all going to be behind us. And unfortunately, when you start the road of addiction, it's a very long journey. It's a lifelong journey that you're on, so it's not going to be perfect. And kind of having those expectations at the onset is good. So setting honest expectations with yourself, for yourself, saying, we're starting on this road and we're probably not going to be past it in 3 months. So having realistic expectations, setting some boundaries with that. You can still love that person, you can still support that person, but you cannot enable that person. So the boundaries could look different for everyone. For some, it's going to say, hey, you can't be at my house after this time, or you can't be at my house around my kids if you're actively in this. Or for some, it's going to say, hey, I can't give you money, but I sure can feed you dinner. So really setting those boundaries, offering them support. We have really great resources in the Permian Basin for addiction support. A lot of people think, well, I don't have time to take off work and go to rehab. And it's like, you don't have to do that. There are outpatient services that you can go to after work. There's online options available. So really kind of offering them that support, but also knowing that they have to be the ones to kind of make that choice. And then I guess kind of on the other side. So that's going to be with someone that's kind of newly in addiction, maybe starting to face that. If you have someone that you're supporting that is really trying to live a life of recovery, you also need to set boundaries on how you can best support them. So let's say you have a friend that is in recovery from alcohol. You're not going to invite them over to your house and have a drinking party or take them to a restaurant where there's going to be a bar right there. Those are all things that can compromise sobriety. So really creating a safe zone for them, helping them maintain that around you, letting them know ahead of time, you're safe with me. If you're trying to live a life of sobriety, I'm not going to put you in a position, you're never going to face that when you're with me, and then holding that standard.
Right. Jessi, you said earlier the whole issue of make sure you're not enabling some people. What would be some additional examples of enabling when it comes to addiction?
So, like I said, it can be big or small. Sometimes it's as simple as like, you don't want someone to drink and drive. At the core, that's good. You do not want someone to drink and drive. However, that does not mean that every Saturday they get to go get drunk and then call you to come pick them up. That can become kind of a crutch for them of like, well, I haven't changed my behavior, but, I can kind of get bailed out. So situations like that, some can be just as simple as like money, living places. If they are in legal trouble, kind of just getting bailed out, so to say, every single time. Because a lot of people, unfortunately, do not face their addiction problems until they have consequences, statistically. That's not for everyone, but a lot of the time consequences do kind of come before the recovery.
Okay, appreciate that very much. Okay, one other question, and it is this: how do you help an adult child that is struggling? It's a very specific question with kind of isolation, feelings of failure, How can they move forward? Maybe they've had a setback, maybe a failure. How, when someone gets stuck like that, what is something that can be helpful to someone in that kind of category?
Job loss is hard. That is like you're grieving the loss of something that really you found a lot of purpose in, probably something you've set up your life, something you're dependent on. We all need money to live. So I think that's a real loss and something you can grieve. I will say if that's that feeling of failure and isolation, if that's a persistent thing that really has been going on for a while, that could have reached the point of depression, so it might be at the point where they need some professional support. But kind of in the general question of how do you support someone, 118 million people have lost their job during 2020 and 2021. So you are not alone. Is the first thing to tell people is like, you are not the only one, and it is horrible. And once again, validating, saying, you know what, yeah, it's terrible that you lost your job. We hate that you lost your job, but your purpose is not found in that job. Your life is not set up on that job. You can get another job. Kind of highlighting their strengths, don't shame them. Don't say, well, you know what, you probably deserved it. They're probably not in the space to hear that. So really highlighting strengths and saying, there are other jobs out there. We all have failures in life. We all have setbacks in life, but we can all find a purpose for our pain. We can all kind of use that to push us forward. If you did do something wrong at your job, that's okay. We've all messed it up at our job, and that's not like undoable. You can go into your next job and kind of learn from that. So really just, once again, all of it's conversation and relationship, reassuring them, highlighting their strengths, and then also telling them, we can't just sit in this. We can't just, kind of like baseball, you can't strike out and never go back to the plate. You do have to go back at some point. And so kind of supporting them in that too, and saying, hey, we'll help you. Kind of what field are you looking in? Let's look together. And just kind of empowering them that they are capable of this. This is something they can do to move forward. And if they need to be upset about it and sad every day, that's okay. But once again, if we haven't reached the point where we need professional support and this is still manageable, then, okay, we're setting a timer. You can be sad for 30 minutes this morning about this, but then you've got to get up and we've got to look forward to the next chapter.
Okay, great word. Jessi, any final word, any kind of final thought about, I'd just like to throw this in when we talk about mental, emotional health. Any final word you'd just like to give at this point?
Well, first of all, I want to commend all of you for having these conversations. I think a lot of times churches are nervous about talking about this. And so you're already in a safe space. If you're in this church, y'all have opened the doors and said this is a safe space for you to come talk to us about it. So I just encourage people to really reach out to you or, other leadership here, because y'all have said, hey, mental health is a priority for us, which I think is the first step. It's okay to not be okay. And y'all have now made that clear, so we don't have to show up on Sunday morning and pretend to be perfect. We can all live with each other kind of in that not okayness, so to say. So I appreciate y'all doing this. I think that is such an asset to people in the community.
Wow. Jessi, thank you so much. You just shared some great things with us. Glad that you guys were with us, and we're so thankful for Jessi and her answers, and thank you very much. All right, we're so glad to have Susie Marquez with us today. Susie, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And would you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a licensed professional counselor, supervisor, and I have been doing that for almost 21 years. And I've worked with children starting at age 5. I've worked all the way up to 95, and just a varied group of people that I have worked with. I've worked in an outpatient setting, I've worked in an inpatient setting, I've worked in a private practice, and so it's been a combination of different types of settings, and mainly dealing with all levels of severities of mental health problems. And providing education to the community is one of those things that's really important for us to be able to take away the stigma about mental health or seeking help.
Okay, that's great. Well, Susie, let me dive into some of these questions that got turned in. And so the first one I want to ask you is, what's the best way to help in this particular situation? The situation is this: here's a person who is struggling with mental or emotional health, but they don't feel like they are. They feel like, well, I know I'm fine, or maybe they're just denying it or whatever. What's the best way to kind of approach that and maybe help and try to be helpful?
I think a lot of times the easiest way to approach someone is to say, you know, if I were having some of these problems, I would hope that someone would come to me and say, you should get some help. Or have you considered getting some help? That's one way to approach it. Another way, so it doesn't make them feel uncomfortable. You say, if I was in that place. Another way would be to say, you know what, I care a lot about you, and I've noticed lots of things changing about you that it kind of worries me, and I'm just reaching out to you. Would you be interested in getting some help? And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you don't need the help. Right. And that would be great if you didn't, but I do know some people that could help. So then that's another approach. So again, still coming from the perspective that you care about them and you want them to be able to get some help.
That's great.
It just makes it a lot easier that way.
Two great approaches. Another question would be this. How do you know, and how does somebody know, and how do they evaluate themselves when, okay, I'm having this struggle? How do you evaluate, I'm now at the point I really do need to talk to somebody, professional help, someone, a counselor, whoever. Where's the kind of line on that, or how would you advise somebody about that?
I think that it's really important to listen to the people in your circle, the ones that you trust the most. If you have one person tell you maybe they were having a bad day, right? If you have two people tell you, you might need to start considering it. But it goes a little bit beyond that too. If it's affecting multiple areas of your life where you're not working well, you're not getting along with others, your kids are struggling with you, you're struggling with your wife or with significant others. So it's covering a lot of different areas where your functioning is not as good as you'd like it to be. And you recognize that too. You just don't know what it is.
Okay.
It's that piece of like, I don't know what it is. It's just I'm not myself. And so I think at that point, it's a good idea just to go get checked. And usually people go to their primary care physicians first. They're like, I don't know what's going on with me. And then the primary care physician, so what kinds of changes have happened with you? And then it said, maybe you should go see a counselor, maybe you should talk to your pastor at the church, something like that. So again, it's always looking at, if you know that you're not yourself, it's okay to go ask someone just to find out where you are. And just because you get help, I think a lot of people confuse mental health with mental illness.
Okay.
And so mental health is just something that we all have. It's like a regular checkup. We should actually all go once a year and get a mental health checkup. And so just because you have the health aspect of it doesn't mean that you have a severe illness, but it's okay to get checked out, because if you do have the illness aspect of it, which is more long-term care, there's help for that too. There really is help for that too.
I got to tell you, one of the things that's come out a couple times in these questions, and I think that's one of the most helpful things, is just thinking of mental health of like anything else, that you need to just regularly, check on that, just like you would anything else.
Just like you would anything else.
All right, last question. So if someone feels like, they actually describe it as, I feel like I'm addicted to feeling unworthy, how does someone break free from that, and how would you describe that, or what kind of category would you put that in?
Okay, so feeling unworthy is not really that uncommon. If we make a mistake, then we feel like we didn't do something well, so we may not be worthy of receiving someone's feedback or someone's acknowledgement, and so it's quite common that people feel unworthy. Addiction means that you've been having this for quite some time, and it's difficult for you to break that pattern. Okay. And that's a kind of a harsh way to describe yourself, but sometimes that happens too. And so what I like to tell people is you have to kind of ask yourself two questions. Is my sense of worthiness coming from one place because I just failed at something, or I just perceive myself at failing at this particular situation? Or has it been long term, that I've been thinking of myself that way for quite some time? And so we've got two different perspectives. Either one of them we have solutions for, but when you start to ask yourself, where is this coming from, it gives you a better direction of where you can go, because it's going to come from your thoughts. What people don't recognize is that in the word unworthy, if we take the un out, we still have worthy, right? So that means you're worthy of receiving some form of affirmation for yourself or from someone else. So I like to use this acronym with the letters of the word worthy. So if you open yourself to walk into a different space where you look at how can you start moving your thoughts into a more positive way. So we're going to use the opposite. The O is the opposite.
Okay.
So if you tell yourself you're dumb, you're going to tell yourself you're smart. Right? So we start working with that. And then we look into, which is moving into the R, if you think about it that way, we're going to record new thoughts. We're going to record new behaviors. We're going to change that tape that we've had for a very long time that makes us think that we're unworthy. The T is for trust, that we have to trust that this is a process. It's going to take some time. We didn't just pick up one day and just absolutely feel that unworthiness. So we're going to trust that it's going to move us into the step of the H, which is the healing. And healing from those words, healing from those behaviors, healing from those patterns. And then yes, the Y is for the yes. You have to say, yes, I will. Yes, I'm trying. Yes, I will want to do that different. And so if you look at the unworthy, we take the un out and we leave just the worthy aspect of it. It changes how we're going to see ourselves and then how we behave in turn. And so I think that's a good way to kind of just think of how do we break that pattern. There's actually a step for that.
Okay, that's excellent. Susie, any final word that you'd just like to throw out? Anything that you'd just like to kind of close with?
Well, I think it's just kind of going back to the mental health aspect of it, that we all have a mental health, and so it's important for us to get checkups. It's great that the more conversations we have about it, the easier it becomes for us to be able to acknowledge that, yes, that is like any other form of our body that needs help and healing. And so there's lots of help. Never be afraid to ask for help, and I'm just thankful that as a community of believers that we are willing to talk about that and move it on to other people. So thank you.
Okay. Great finishing word. Thank you, Susie.